the Lord Jesus Christ. As I promised at the end of the last video, I now continue with an evaluation of the Westcott and Hort theory. The first story the first story that was built upon that false foundation that we talked about last time was genealogy. The fact of deliberate and apparently numerous alterations in the early years of textual history is a considerable inconvenience to Hort's theory for two reasons. It introduces an unpredictable variable which the canons of internal evidence cannot handle. And two, it puts the recovery of the original beyond the reach of the genealogical method. To illustrate the second point, Hort's view of early textual history may be represented by figure A below, whereas the view suggested by the Church Fathers, the early Church Fathers, may be represented by figure B below. The extra lines in figure B represent the fabrications introduced by different heretics, as the early fathers called them. As you look at that, genealogy cannot arbitrate the conflicting claims posed by the first line of descendants in figure B, where you have extra influence coming in. Further, if a genealogical reconstruction ends up with only two immediate descendants of the original, as in Hort's own reconstruction, then the genealogical method ceases to be applicable, as Hort himself recognized. You see it there, page 42. Further, in Colwell's words, this method, as genealogy, quote, rested on identity in error as the clue to common ancestry. These errors were unintentional changes which can be identified objectively as error. Agreement in readings of this kind seldom occurs by chance or coincidence. The New Testament copies differ widely from copies of the classics, the Greek classics. At this point, the percentage of variations due to error in copies of the classics is large. In the manuscripts of the New Testament, on the other hand, scholars now believe that most variations were made deliberately. End quote. The reconstruction of family trees is seriously complicated by the presence of deliberate alteration. And those are not the only difficulties under which genealogy labors. We have already noted Hort's definition and supposed use of genealogy. However, scholars have so far isolated only a few parent-child sets among all 3,000 plus continuous text manuscripts. Codex Claromontanus apparently has a child 3 centuries younger. Minuscule 205 may have been copied from 206, or 208 rather. Codices F and G containing Paul's epistles appear to be almost twin brothers, but we don't have the parents. Also in the Apocalypse, Hoskier has identified a number of related groups, which includes several pairs. Okay. How then did Hort go about plotting the genealogical descent of the extant manuscripts? M. Parvis answered, quote, Westcott and Hort never applied the genealogical method to the New Testament manuscripts, end quote. Fee says much the same, quote, properly speaking, genealogy must deal with the descent of manuscripts and must reconstruct stemata for that descent. This Hort never did. Rather, he applied the method to text types, and he did so not to find the original text, but to eliminate the Byzantine manuscripts from further consideration. And Colwell agreed, quote, that Westcott and Hort did not apply this method to the manuscripts of the New Testament is obvious. Where are the charts which start with the majority of late manuscripts and climb back through diminishing generations of ancestors to the neutral and Western texts? The answer is that they are nowhere. Did you get that? They are nowhere. They don't exist. Look again at the first diagram and you will see that A, B, C, etc. are not actual manuscripts of the New Testament, but hypothetical manuscripts. The demonstrations or illustrations of the genealogical method as applied to New Testament manuscripts by the followers of Hort likewise use hypothetical manuscripts, not actual codices. Note, for example, the diagrams and discussions in Kenyon's most popular work on textual criticism, including the most recent edition. All the manuscripts referred to are imaginary manuscripts, and the later of these charts was printed 60 years after Hort. End quote. How then could Hort speak of only, quote, occasional ambiguities in the evidence for the genealogical relations, end quote, or say, quote, so far as genealogical relations are discovered with perfect certainty, the textual results which follow from them are perfectly certain. 2, being directly involved in historical facts, and any apparent presumptions against them suggested by other methods are mere guesses against knowledge, end quote. How could he say that when he had not demonstrated the existence of any such relation, not one, much less with perfect certainty? Look, was Hort dishonest, or was he just deceived? And if he was deceived, by whom? Have you thought of that? Another challenge to genealogy is mixture. Colwell said, quote, the second limitation upon the application of the genealogical method to the manuscripts of the New Testament springs from the almost universal presence of mixture in these manuscripts. The genealogical diagram printed above, page 110, from Westcott and Hort, shows that what happens when there is no mixture. When there is mixture, and Westcott and Hort state that it is common, in fact, almost universal in some degree, then the genealogical method as applied to manuscripts is useless. Did you get that? Useless. Without mixture, a family tree is an ordinary tree trunk with its branches only standing on the branches, with a single trunk, the original text at the top. The higher up or the further back you go from the mass of late manuscripts, the fewer ancestors you have. With mixture, you reverse this in any series of generations. The number of possible combinations defies computation, let alone the drawing of diagrams. Look, the sort of genealogical diagram that one always sees is like a family tree that shows only male parents. But because of mixture, the diagram should be like a family tree that shows both parents, both father and mother, at every level. In that case, the farther back you go, the more hopelessly complicated it gets. Just try it and see. Please note that this applies only to any attempt to apply genealogy to manuscripts. That's important, manuscripts. The grouping of manuscripts on the basis of shared readings is both possible and necessary. That's another story. Okay, going on, other scholars have agreed with Colwell that the genealogical method has never been applied to the New Testament. And they state further that it cannot be applied. Get that? Thus, Zuntz says it is inapplicable, Wagner that it is useless, and Alant that it cannot be applied to the New Testament. Colwell also declared emphatically that it cannot be so applied. In the light of all this, what are we to think of Hort when he asserts, quote, Hort, for skepticism as to the possibility of obtaining a trustworthy genealogical interpretation of documentary phenomena in the New Testament, there is, we are persuaded, no justification either in antecedent probability or in experience. Whatever may be the ambiguity of the whole evidence in particular passages, the general course of future criticism must be shaped by the happy circumstance that the 4th century has bequeathed to us 2 manuscripts, of which even the less incorrupt must have been of exceptional purity among its own contemporaries, end quote. Hort here refers to codices B and Olive, upon which, as a matter of fact, his theory depends. Comparing his, quote, exceptional purity with Hosky's demonstration that the 2 manuscripts, Codex and B, disagree over 3,000 times just in the Gospels, quite apart from the times when they are both wrong. The poor contemporaries must have really been terrible. That's according to Hort, of course. After demolishing the genealogical method, Colwell, right? He concluded his article by saying, quote, yet Westcott and Hort's genealogical method slew the Textus Receptus. The a priori demonstration is logically irrefutable. End quote. Yeah, but however, the a priori demonstration cannot stand in the face of an a posteriori demonstration to the contrary. And Colwell, listen, get this, Colwell himself, some 12 years prior to this statement, had recognized that the a priori demonstration to which he refers has in fact been refuted. Colwell recognized that. Quoting Colwell, quote, the universal and ruthless dominance of the Middle Ages by one text type is now recognized as a myth. The complexities and perplexities of the medieval text have been brought forcibly to our attention by the work of 2 great scholars, Hermann von Soden and Kershaw Blake. This invaluable pioneer work of von Soden greatly weakened the dogma of the dominance of a homogeneous Syrian text, but the fallacy received its death blow at the hands of Professor Lake. In an excursus published with his study of the Caesarean text of Mark, he annihilated the theory that the Middle Ages were ruled by a single recension which attained a high degree of uniformity, end quote. Actually, Hort produced no demonstration at all. 0. Just assumptions. Well, since the genealogical method has not been applied to the manuscripts of the New Testament and cannot be applied, it may not honestly be used as an integral part of a theory of New Testament textual criticism. That's dishonest. If it was Hort's genealogical method that, quote, slew the Textus Receptus, then the Textus Receptus must still be alive and well. The weapon was never used. But Hort claimed to have used it, and the weapon was so fearsome that, and he spoke of the results with such confidence that he won the day. Colwell said again, quote, since Westcott and Hort, the genealogical method has been the canonical method of restoring the original text of the books of the New Testament. It dominates the handbooks. Sir Frederick Kenyon, C.R. Gregory, Alexander Suter, and A.T. Robertson are a few of the many who declare its excellence. End quote. Well, you know, the situation is essentially the same today. And the warning that Colwell gave in 1965, 65, well, how many years? 70 years ago, is still valid. Quote, many years ago, I joined others in pointing out the limitations in Hort's use of genealogy and the inapplicability of genealogical method, strictly defined, to the textual criticism of the New Testament. Since then, many others have assented to this criticism, and the building of family trees is only rarely attempted. Therefore, we might assume that the influence of Hort's emphasis upon genealogical method is no longer a threat. But this assumption is false. Hort's brilliant work still captivates our minds. So when confronted by a reading whose support is minimal and widely divorced in time and place, we think first and only of genealogical relationships. Hort has put genealogical blinders on our eyes. Hey, do you have genealogical blinders? To conclude, present-day scholars, exegetes, and translators continue to act as though the genealogical method not only can be, but has been applied to the New Testament manuscripts, and to base their work on these supposed results. But what about those results? In the next video, I will discuss, God willing, text types and recension. And thanks for watching. That's it for today.